Today's video will be about the tides. Everywhere on Earth, oceans are going to rise and fall twice a day to produce the tides. You can see in this animation right here that you're going to have high tide in this location, and exactly across on the other side of the planet, there will also be high tide happening. Same goes for low tide. Wherever there's a low tide, exactly on the other side of the Earth will be another low tide. If the Earth spins around or rotates in 24 hours, you can see that the time difference here would be about 12 hours. It's actually about 12 and a half hours. But if we look here, there's high tide here. 12 hours away would be another high tide. In between each high and low tide is about 6 hours. So if you've ever been to the beach, you've sat out all day long, you've probably noticed that if you were out there longer than 6 hours, you probably have experienced a time when the tide got lower, the tide got higher. So our main focus here is, why is this happening? Well, both sides here, both bulges, are caused by two separate forces, gravity and what's known as the inertial force. If the moon could be held in place, the moon's gravity would pull the oceans toward itself. So even though we have a stronger gravitational pull, the moon still does have a gravitational pull on us. And it's not going to pull the rocks anywhere, so what happens is it pulls the water. So the water gets pulled off to one side due to the moon. But the Earth isn't stationary. The Earth is rotating around. So as it rotates around, we can also see that the Earth has this inertial force pulling on it. And this inertial or outward force is what causes the bulge on the other side. So not only does the moon here create a bulge on this side, but also where the Earth is spinning creates this inertial force. So that's why we see high tides right across from one another. Okay, so this inertial force here is causing the bulge on this side, but there's also a bulge here because of the moon's pull. So what we find is what we saw first, that we have high tide on opposite sides of the Earth and then low tide on the other sides. We can also have what's known as spring tides and neap tides. Spring tides are going to occur at new and full moon phases. If we look here at this picture, you can see that when we do have new and full moon phases, all three celestial objects are in a line. And we find that during a spring tide, or during the full moon and the new moon, we have on Earth the highest high tides and the lowest low tides. This makes sense because not only is the moon pulling now, but also the sun is pulling. So that high tide is going to be the highest, and if you have a high tide, then you're going to have less water for your low tide, so you're going to have your lowest low tide. And again, this is because everything is in line, so the sun is pulling as well as the moon. A neap tide happens at a quarter moon. So we're going to have the sun, earth, and moon at a right angle to one another. So now we don't have the sun and moon pulling in the same direction. So we're not going to have these really high tides anymore. What we see is that we have our lowest high tides because the sun and moon are pulling in different directions, and we have our highest low tides. So depending upon where the moon is in its revolution around the Earth will cause a difference between our high tides and our low tides. Last thing I want to show you is this is a time-lapse photography of the Bay of Fundy, which is in Nova Scotia. This is a very narrow channel, and you see over 12 hours. Your low tide was the beginning of this movie where you can't see, or you can see, the ground. And then our high tide here, we're going to see in just a minute, where this whole channel is filled all the way up with water. And then in 6 hours, you're going to see the low tide happen again. So you really have to, if you are anyone who owns these boats here, you have to plan your boating adventure very specifically within that 6 hour period, or else you're going to get stuck out in the middle of the bay and have to wait until the high tide rolls around again. So again, this is the Bay of Fundy, and this is an extreme thing of tides here, but in different places it isn't as much, but I wanted to show you just so you could see this phenomenon.